Carlos King, a name that once stood for success and power in the reality TV world, has seen his empire crumble in a way no one could have ever predicted. The man who once commanded the attention of millions, dominating the reality TV landscape with hit after hit, is now facing a fallout of catastrophic proportions. But what led to this dramatic fall from grace? It all started with the sudden and shocking resignations of his top executives, people who had stood by him through thick and thin, trusted him, and helped build his empire from the ground up. These weren't just employees, these were the very architects behind his success, the ones who knew his secrets, understood his vision, and had been there for every twist and turn in his career. The first resignation came like a bombshell. His closest confidant, someone who had been by his side through every scandal, every controversy, and every triumph, walked away without warning. No one could believe it. How could someone so loyal, someone who had helped Carlos reach the top, just turn their back on him? It was the beginning of the end for Carlos, but he still thought he could control the narrative. He stayed silent, hoping the storm would blow over, but it didn't. One by one, his top executives followed suit. With each resignation, the shockwaves spread through the industry and whispers of betrayal began to grow louder. These weren't just simple job changes. These were people who had spent years working alongside Carlos, and they weren't leaving quietly. They were ready to expose the truth, ready to reveal the dark secrets that Carlos had worked so hard to hide. Behind the scenes, things had been falling apart for a long time. For years, Carlos had been known as the mastermind, the visionary who could turn any show into a hit. But with that power came a hunger for control, and with control came manipulation. His executives, the ones who had helped him build his empire, were growing tired of it. They had watched him manipulate not just the reality stars, but also the people around him. They had been subjected to his toxic leadership, his need to control every aspect of the business, and his ruthless tactics to stay on top. And yet, for the longest time, they had stayed silent. They feared the consequences of going against him. After all, Carlos was powerful, influential, and he knew how to destroy anyone who crossed him. But things started to change. The cracks in the empire began to show. Carlos wasn't just demanding from his team, he was manipulating them. He pitted them against each other, creating a culture of fear and competition. He spread rumors, played mind games, and made sure that no one could trust anyone else. In a place where loyalty should have been valued, Carlos had turned it into a toxic battleground. His executives began to realize that they were being used, that they were pawns in his game of power, and many of them had had enough. The first to leave was his closest confidant. This resignation sent shockwaves through the industry. It wasn't just a resignation, it was a signal that things were far worse than anyone had imagined. This was more than a falling out, it was betrayal. The executives who left weren't just running away from a toxic environment, they were fighting back. They had the power to expose Carlos for what he truly was. His former confidant didn't just leave. They took everything they knew with them, and soon the others followed. As more executives resigned, the details of Carlos's manipulative tactics started to surface. They went public, revealing stories of bullying, emotional abuse, and manipulation. They told of how Carlos would pit his team against each other, how he played favorites to create jealousy and insecurity, and how he had used them to further his own interests while never acknowledging their contributions. The public was shocked, but Carlos wasn't backing down. He tried to fight back. He threatened lawsuits, tried to silence his former executives with non-disclosure agreements, and even launched a smear campaign to discredit them. But it was too late. His attempts to control the narrative only made things worse. The more he fought, the more his lies were exposed. The executives, once silenced by fear, had found their voices. They stood their ground, revealing even more about the toxic work culture Carlos had created. It wasn't just about a boss who had a difficult personality. It was about a pattern of behavior that had been going on for years. They weren't just speaking out for themselves. They were speaking out for everyone who had been manipulated, belittled, and discarded by Carlos's cruel tactics. And, what's more, they had evidence. Emails, recordings, and witnesses who were ready to back up their claims. What made the whole situation even more shocking was the fact that Carlos's empire, which he had always painted as a result of his genius, was really built on the hard work of those who had been overshadowed by his ego. The executives had been the real masterminds behind the success of his shows, not Carlos. He had taken all the credit, using their ideas and sacrifices to build his own brand while never acknowledging their efforts. It was a betrayal on a massive scale. But even as the truth came out, Carlos refused to let go of his grip on power. He tried to silence his former executives, but the more he fought, the more they spoke out. The media was in a frenzy. Fans who had once idolized Carlos began to question his integrity. His loyal followers turned against him, and his enemies saw an opportunity to take him down. Carlos, once the powerful mastermind behind reality TV, was now exposed, vulnerable, and fighting to regain control of his empire. The fall of Carlos King wasn't just a scandal, it was a wake-up call for everyone in the entertainment industry. It wasn't just about a toxic boss. It was about the way the industry had allowed such manipulation to go on for so long. But it wasn't just the executives who were ready to fight back. One person in particular stood up and became the voice of those who had been silenced for years. Winter, a key figure within Carlos's inner circle, stepped forward with a determination to expose the truth. She had seen it all, the manipulation, the lies, the way Carlos had controlled not just the reality TV shows, but the people working for him. Winter had been a part of the system, but when she realized how deep the manipulation ran, she couldn't stay silent any longer. She had witnessed firsthand how Carlos used drama to manipulate the cast, how he twisted the truth to create storylines, and how he pitted people against each other for the sake of ratings. But she wasn't just an outsider looking in. She had been part of it. She had gone along with his schemes, helping him create the drama he so loved. But the tipping point came when she saw how far he was willing to go to destroy anyone who stood in his way. Winter's revelations were nothing short of explosive. She didn't just spill the tea, she set the whole table on fire. She exposed how Carlos controlled the narrative, how he manipulated not only the cast members, but also the audience. He had turned reality TV into his own personal playground, twisting the truth to fit his agenda. Winter had the receipts, emails, scripts, and recordings that proved the extent of Carlos's manipulation. But the most shocking part was how Carlos tried to fight back against Winter's revelations. He launched a smear campaign, calling her a liar, a troublemaker, and trying to discredit her at every turn. But Winter wasn't intimidated. She stood her ground, determined to expose the truth, no matter the consequences. She went public with her story, revealing the depth of Carlos's manipulation and the toxic environment he had created. As the truth continued to spill out, more people began to come forward, inspired by Winter's bravery. They shared their own stories of manipulation, abuse, and deceit. Winter had become a symbol of courage, a voice for the voiceless who had suffered under Carlos's control. And Carlos, he was powerless to stop them. The more he tried to silence his critics, the more his lies were exposed. The public was furious. Fans who once adored Carlos turned against him. His empire began to crumble, and his carefully crafted image shattered. His reputation, his credibility, and his influence all slipped away, and in the end, it was the people who had helped him rise to the top who took him down. But this isn't the end of the story. Carlos is still fighting to regain control, to rebuild his empire, and to silence his critics. But Winter isn't backing down. She's determined to expose every last secret and make sure that the truth is known. The battle isn't over, and the drama is far from finished. Winter's fight is just beginning, and as long as she's around, Carlos's reign of manipulation is coming to an end. This isn't just a story about one man's fall from power. It's a story about an entire industry built on deception, manipulation, and control. And Winter? She's ready to tear it all down.